All right, welcome back to Hoop Hierarchy. This is KC, and this is going to be the first of a few NCAA tier lists I'm going to be doing. This one here is the one where I'm going to rank top four seeds based on what I believe to be their championship potential. Uh, like I said, this is the first of a few tier lists I'm going to do on the NCAA tournament. I have some thoughts about not just the higher seeds, but some of the lower seeds as well. With that being said, I'm going to get right into this one. I think, first and foremost, I'm going to kind of categorize what the tier lists are meaning here. So, S tier is a championship favorite, a team that I feel like is likely to at least make it to the Final Four Elite Eight area and has a really good shot at winning the championship if they get there. Now, A tier, I'm gonna say, is more of a contender, but they've got some flaws that makes it to where they're not quite a favorite compared to what an S tier team may be. For B tier, is a team I feel as though a dark horse team that has a lot of issues, more or less, but under certain circumstances, they absolutely could make a run if everything goes their way. And then C tier is a team that I just can't see winning. Yeah, sure, it's March, anything could happen, but the teams that I'm going to be putting in C tier, I think they've got too many flaws to overcome, whether it be just serious issues with the way they play, or they're just not spectacular compared to some of the other teams they will be playing along their path. Um, that's just how I've categorized these tiers here. This is one of the hardest tournaments to predict, I think, because usually there's one or two teams, in the past couple of years that have been true favorites. This year, I really think there's multiple teams that have a really good shot. And while Alabama's the number one overall seed, I don't think they're all that better than most of the two seeds and even maybe a three seed or a four seed, depending on who that team is. And I really think it could go any number of ways this year. Um, so, with that all being said, I'm going to start it off with Alabama. The Alabama is the number one overall seed, as I just discussed. They're probably rightfully the number one overall team when it comes to ranking. They are, when at full strength, the team to beat. I think. First and foremost, they have, in my opinion, the best NBA prospect out of the whole of NCAA in Brandon Miller. I think to me he is an even better version of what people thought Jabari Smith was last year. He's a force to be reckoned with, especially offensively, but he is not the only piece on this team. A couple of veteran guards in Quinterly and Sears are really key for the tournament. Being able to control the pace and handle pressure is a key that veteran guards have over some younger guys. Can't forget about Noah Clowney as well, as Miller isn't the only difference maker as a freshman on this team. They've got some flaws that leaves them vulnerable, however. From a purely gameplay perspective, they have the potential to fall cold from behind the arc. They have they have the interior players to make up for that, but if they get caught by a solid team on a good night, um, that could be problematic for them. Their other issue is turnovers, and if that shows their head, that could really cause them to get upset. Their road isn't incredibly easy either. Maryland or West Virginia isn't the hardest matchup, but and I predict it'll be Maryland. Um, they have competed with top teams this season, and West Virginia has too. These are teams that really are not projected to beat Alabama, but could give them a game. After that, though, it's really a pretty tough team, and what I think will be San Diego State in the Sweet 16, and then a matchup with a team that I simply see as just a better team in Arizona. Um, the main thing that I think will affect them overall, though, is of course all the animosity and pressure that's surrounding them, based around that controversy with that issue that they had on campus that involved Miller. They've looked less effective late season than they did midseason, and so just for that reason, Alabama is clearly a contender, but I'm not going to be picking them to win, so they will be A tier for me. The next team I'm going to talk about is another one of those one seeds, Houston. Houston was initially my pick to win it all, but I have pivoted off of Houston. I think there is just one other team that I've grown to like a little bit more from a resume standpoint. Houston is a well-rounded and veteran-led team, though, with a star freshman, of course, there to balance that out, that just crushes teams defensively. I have always been a proponent of the defense wins championships mentality, and I think that very well could be a possibility for this Houston team. They have a really good shot. Um, with Shed and Sasser in particular, they're going to be giving trouble to any opposing guard, and Jerace Walker just dominates inside. If there is to be any obvious criticism of Houston, it's going to be one, their weak schedule compared to other teams, and their occasional propensity to fall off or fall cold offensively. I think more that the way that they're built on vets, defense, and inside work, I think that's perfect for withstanding those flaws. I think more so than a team that lives and dies by the three, for example. I do think their biggest test is going to be another strong defensive team that can match them in Texas in the Elite Eight. I think Texas is tested against top teams in a way that Houston has not been throughout the year. Um, Houston, I do feel, though, is one of the more well rounded teams and teams most built for March. I'm going to be placing Houston in the S tier. Next one team I'm going to talk a little bit about is Kansas. Kansas is a team that they have a really effective core of guys, and they have one of the greatest coaches in the NCAA. Fortunately, Bill Self is going to be back for the tournament, which is great news for them. Jalen Wilson is their best player. Grady Dick is one of the best freshmen in NCAA. But to me, DeJuan Harris makes this team run. This is backed up by the stats, by the way. When he performs, they're near unstoppable. But if he has an off night, they actually kind of revert to being not all that good in the grand scheme of things. They're a little subject to some bad losses, where they have really gotten blown out by teams that they are not worse than. They have been beaten pretty badly by Texas, who I actually do think might be just as good as Kansas. But they've been beaten by Iowa State once, by TCU, and these have all been pretty good blowout wins for these other teams. I really like Kansas, and they can win it all, but I think these lapses against decent teams, plus based on just how hard it is to repeat the NCAA tournament, I cannot bring myself to favor them. So for that reason, I'm going to be putting Kansas in the A tier. Now for the final one seed, Purdue. It feels wrong to say that I would almost certainly predict this team is going to lose before the Final Four. Yes, they're a one seed, but there's just something about them that just does not scream tournament favorite. I would predict them to lose before the Final Four. They're powered by Zach Edey, who is a complete offensive force, and his pure gravity opens up looks for everyone else. Um, Morton and Gillis are hardworking forwards. Their freshman guard duo and Lawyer and Smith do have the potential to raise Purdue's ceiling, and they really can beat anyone. Obviously, as a one seed, they can make that run, but they can lose to anyone too, and they have. And the reason they do, they're just too dependent on Edey. Something has just looked off when it comes to Smith and Lawyer recently. They just haven't looked all that good. I think they've become a little bit passive and a little too defer. They defer a little bit too much to Edey. Along with that, being so reliant on a big man puts you in serious trouble if they have a game where he gets in foul trouble. My confidence in Purdue is not very high, and I would be surprised if they made a run to the title. Would I be completely stunned? No, but I just cannot see it for them. So I'm going to be putting Purdue in the B tier. I don't think they're on the tier of the other one seeds and a lot of the two seeds. So first two seed I'm going to cover is Arizona. Arizona just seems to have something about them that makes them seem like a real threat to win it all. They have arguably one of the best front court duos in the nation in Tubelis and Ballo. They work together really well. Ramey and Pell Larson play their roles really well, and Kirk Kreese is a phenomenal tempo setter at guard. Does a really good job at that. Their top guys are better than just about anyone on their best night, and when they get their momentum rolling, I honestly believe that they may be the best team in the country. The only holdup I have on them is their resume. It's not that they haven't beaten quality opponents, because they absolutely have. They are 6-1 against top 25 teams. It is the losses that they have. There is no reason they should have lost to teams like Stanford and Utah and teams like that. This gives me a bit of pause thinking that really they could get upset by any team if they have that weird random off night that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense analytically. But that being said, I think their path is really easy up to Alabama in the Elite Eight potentially. I think that their poor performances are mainly due to slacking off in what they felt were less important games, as they have tended to bring it in big time matchups. And if they can continue to keep that type of energy throughout the tournament, I believe they're the top 2 or 3 favorite alongside Houston and Texas. And so for that reason, I'm going to be putting Arizona in the S tier. The second 2 seed I'm going to cover is Marquette. Marquette is absolutely rolling right now. It is not hard to see why so many people are high on them. They're led by a tried and tested March Madness staple coach in Shaka Smart. This team may be getting a little slept on by some because they aren't really thinking about Marquette as a type of team that can make that run. They absolutely can. The pace for them is phenomenal. Like most of the successful March teams, they have a great point guard and they're very experienced all the way down the lineup. They've been absolutely killing it in recent months, but I feel as though some of their rebounding troubles are going to have the potential to come back and bite them. They struggle a bit against bigger rebounding teams, for example. If they come up against like maybe Kentucky in their bracket, which they can, I could see that being a tough matchup for them. Even with that as their weakness, they only lost to one of the more dominant inside teams in the country in Purdue by 5, so they have showed that they can overcome that weakness. Um, that just it just is something that is a difficulty for them, and it might put them in the potential to get upset by a team that is a bad matchup for them. They aren't quite at the top echelon, but they are close, and for that reason, Marquette is going to be going A tier for me. Next up is UCLA. I think UCLA is a really strong group that I may have had borderline S tier if they were fully healthy. Tiger Campbell and Jaime Jaquez are still there. They're still leading the group. What a great duo to lead them. However, I think too many people are discounting how important losing a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Jalen Clark is going to be, and potentially losing some minutes or some time from Adam Bana. He may be back, but will he be at 100%? I don't know. Plus, I think the road could be really difficult. Northwestern, if they play them, isn't great, but can beat anyone, as they have in the Big Ten. Then it's a potential matchup with one of the stronger three seeds in Gonzaga, then either a Kansas team or, in my opinion, just as likely a UConn team, who are both by no means easy outs and really tough teams to play. I was wanting to put UCLA in the A tier, but I think their path to the final mixed with their injuries makes me think there are just too many opportunities along the way where they could run into a really tough matchup that could beat them. They are at the very top end of the B tier for me. So next up, the last 2 seed I'm going to cover, Texas. This was not my pick going into this tier list video. Like I said earlier, I had Houston, but man, there's just something about this Texas team. Reading more and more into it, researching more about them, they have got it, I think. Texas has consistently been one of my teams that I thought that not many people would pick, but they could easily win it all. They have beaten some great teams like Kansas, Baylor, Kansas State, TCU. They might have the most quality wins out of everyone except for probably Kansas. They have a strong defense. They have a balanced offensive attack. They can give any team trouble. They can beat you in so many different ways. They've got like 6 pieces that can really cause issues on any given night. I think the main holdup I have for them is one, that their defense is great, but has been subject to huge lapses over the span of full games, like in their loss to Kansas State, for example. Regardless of that, though, they're just so well-rounded. Something about them just gives off a similar vibe to that Baylor team that won it all a couple years ago. Just a really, really tough and well-rounded team with multiple pieces that can really hurt you. You can't really just shut down one guy and do well against them. They're just a tough, well-rounded team. One of the hardest matchups to me to pick right now is that Texas versus Houston game in the Elite Eight. I think that will be the matchup, and I think the winner of that game will be in the national championship, and I think whoever it is probably has a good shot of winning. Texas is going to be an S tier team for me. I think Texas is really, really good. So now onto the three seeds. First team I'm going to talk about is Baylor. I think Baylor is obviously good, but they're not the same team that won it a couple years ago. They just don't seem to have that same energy. Um, I just don't know what it is about them. Yes, they have a great trio in George, Flagler, and Cryer, and they could all shoot, but just an off night from three could spell trouble for this team, especially against a team that can get hot. Their defense can really struggle against high-powered offenses, and this is one upset pick that I really think is a lot of people aren't going to be thinking about, but could truly happen. I think the efficient offense of UC Santa Barbara is going to catch Baylor off guard and have a chance at taking them out. I don't know if I would recommend picking that or not, but do not be shocked if that is the one just upset that no one thinks about that actually happens. I think Baylor could absolutely lose to that UC Santa Barbara team. Even if they do get past them, they face a potent offense with a really strong interior presence in Creighton, followed by an insane 1-2 of Arizona and Alabama if they keep moving through. I'd be shocked if this Baylor team could go all the way through with the struggles they've had defensively and the absolute gauntlet they're going to have to come up against if they do go on a bit of a run. For that reason, Baylor's going to be going C tier for me. I'm just not seeing it with this Baylor team. Next up is Kansas State. So Kansas State is going to be incredibly slept on in most brackets. They've got a tough run of games to go through, which is why. Um, I think some people are gonna think like, oh, okay, there's people picking against Kansas State, so I'm gonna go with them because they are a higher seed. Um, Guys like Noel and Johnson can get them past the fact that they are being slept on. They have a defense that can keep up with anyone, that can trouble even some of the best teams. But I think their flaws are going to show in the offensive end, however, as Noel tends to turn the ball over in their losses, as does their team in general. And I think they have a potential to beat a lot of teams, but that turnover issue is going to eventually be their downfall, in my opinion. I think Kansas State's going to go C tier for me as well. I'm not seeing a long run for them. Next up is Xavier. Xavier has really come on strong this season. No one really considered them at the beginning of the year, but they've really shown that they can contend with the best of them, with wins over UConn and Marquette in competitive games against Gonzaga and Indiana. They have a well-rounded and strong attack, including Sule Boom, Colby Jones, and Jack Nunge. Their main flaw is, though, that they're going to be without Zach Freemantle, which is a huge factor in their offense, one of their better players overall. They did all right without him, but it's hard in March when you aren't at full strength. Along with that, they are great offensively, but questionable defensively. In March, almost always the most successful teams are the ones that can do both. I think Xavier's has enough talent to stick around with some teams, and their competition early on isn't that strong, but I really can't see them beating probably Texas and Houston back to back to reach the Final Four. I'm going to say C tier for Xavier as well. Next up, the final three seed, Gonzaga. I think Gonzaga is easily the strongest three seed to me. The other three seem like they're probably going to be tough outs, but unlikely to make a run to the championship. Gonzaga is a little bit different, I think. Yes, I know they have a history of disappointing in March, but I think it could be kind of like one of those post-hype runs. Like, kind of like what Kentucky has done in the past, where they've been super highly ranked in a year, but then disappoint. Maybe they get upset. And then no one expects it. As a lower seed, they come back in and they make a run. I think that there are some signs that indicate this is possible for this Gonzaga team. For one, they still have Drew Timme. He is still a force on the inside, and any team is going to have trouble stopping him. He isn't the only one, though. Julian Strother is legit. Rasir Bolton, Malachi Smith are good pieces as well. It took them a while to get going, but they've been on a roll recently. They've beaten some tough teams. They really beat on that St. Mary's team that's a good team really well in that final for their conference. I think they have a good chance to make a run in what I think is going to be a pretty easy path compared to the other three seeds. I think they will eventually go down, but don't be surprised if they go further than many are expecting. I'm going to say B tier for Gonzaga. Now on to the four seeds. Virginia. Virginia looked pretty good early on in the year, but it's been rough going recently. Kahik Clark and Reese Beekman are a good guard duo. Um, I like what Armand Franklin provides, but they've been really pretty rough looking recently. Close game with Louisville and getting stopped by Boston College. That's just That's just not good. That's just bad on so many levels. Their offense is slow, like a typical Tony Bennett offense, but usually his offenses are slow and efficient. This one's just slow. I think they'll be in for a bit of a rude awakening in their first round game against Furman. I do think if they manage to get past Furman, San Diego State, or Charleston would easily be favored over Virginia for me. Then it's a face-off with Alabama, almost certainly, and I'd be stunned if they made it out of that group. If they made it to the Elite Eight, I would be stunned, truly, let alone making a run to the championship. So for me, Virginia is going to be C tier. Next up is Tennessee. Tennessee is just quite frankly overseeded. They're a fine team, I suppose, but 7 losses in the past 12 games after losing their best player just to goes to show me that this team is just not better than, say, Duke, who I believe was underseeded as a 5. Santiago Vescovi is now the lead of the show, and he could certainly hold his own. He is a good player, but this team is trying to run without their engine. I think they will get past Louisiana. Some people are picking that upset. That will not be me. I'm not as high on Louisiana as some people are, but I think Duke is a much better team than Tennessee at this point. And realistically, so is Oral Roberts if that's the matchup. If Oral Roberts beats Duke, I'm picking Oral Roberts over Tennessee as well. Um, Tennessee is comfortably C tier for me. Next up is Indiana. Indiana has the benefit of having one of the better 1-2 punches in the country in Trace Jackson Davis and Jalen Hood-Schifino. Um, Superstar play has always been one of the main keys when it comes to making a run and having success in March. Indiana can beat any team on any night, especially if both stars are on. If one's in foul trouble and having an off game, their ceiling is much lower. However, having 2 stars is beneficial in that situation because one can kind of make up for the other, like what Indiana did against Purdue when Jackson Davis had kind of a rough game. Hood-Schifino kind of carried the load. That's what's beneficial about having 2-star type players. Um, if they can get some involvement from other pieces, which they have struggled to get kind of throughout the season, if they do get involvement from pieces like Galloway, Bates, Race Thompson, they actually do have a relatively high ceiling. The consistency for them has always been kind of an issue, though. They've beaten a great team, and then they've had a letdown against a team that isn't as great. They do not have an easy path. Kent State is a really rough first round matchup for them. That is a tough team. Um, I do think Indiana is going to be a hard team to beat, though. I think they'll get past Kent State, and I think they could go on a run. I think that is possible for them. They are going to be B tier for me. Then finally, UConn. UConn is the strongest 4 seed and an actual threat in my eyes. They are a top 10 offense and a top 25 ranked defense, and that is really what you want to see in March, a team that is tough on both ends. At the beginning of the year, they looked like a possible favorite for the title. They were a complete force at the beginning of the year. They fell off for a while, but now they have their rhythm. They look really, really hard to stop. They've only recently been beat by a great Marquette team by 2 points. They've got a core of Sonogo, Klingon, Hawkins, Jackson, Newton. They're well-rounded. They're balanced. They're a genuine threat to make the Final Four, in my opinion. If not, challenge to win it all. They have really good wins in their schedule. They can beat anyone. UConn is going to be A tier for me. All right. That is the end of the tier list. I am glad that you guys stuck around to the very end of the video. This is a newer channel that's kind of going to be focused on tier lists. I'm going to be doing a lot of NBA mainly, but here during March Madness, this is my favorite season when it comes to basketball, and so I always put a lot of work into studying, educating myself on these teams, and trying to put the best information out there when it comes to brackets. Like I said, this would not be my only bracket tier list. I'm going to be doing tier lists focusing around some of the mid-tier teams and some of the underdog teams. So if you have interest in that type of content, go ahead and like and hit the subscribe button to keep up with my posts. I'm going to be trying to pack at least a couple more in here before the games start. So with all that being said, I appreciate, again, you guys listening through this video and hope you enjoy.